But this chapter already I given this information in previous classes. But once again, I'll recall, right? So sexual reproduction in flowering plants, right? So what are flowering plants? The plants which produces flowers are called flowering plants. We know very well, right? So angiosperms, best example for that, flowering plants. But what about gymnosperms? Both gymnosperms and angiosperms are considered as flowering plants. But actual flowering plants are angiospermic plants. But what about gymnosperms? So that gymnosperms produces flower-like structures, flower-like structures, but we can't consider them as true flowers, right? So actual flowering plants are angiospermic plants, right? So in this class, we will see what is sexual reproduction in flowering plants, but already we have some idea. So what is sexual reproduction, what is asexual reproduction, so what type of asexual reproductive methods are there, right? And what is the actual sexual reproduction, so that information already we discussed in previous classes, right? So now we are going to discuss flowering plants. So in flowering plants, how sexual reproduction takes place. So what are pre-fertilization events? What are fertilization events? What are post-fertilization events? We will see one by one, right? So it is a complex process and slow process and elaborate process, right? So before we are going to discuss sexual reproduction in flowering plants, so we need to know what is flower, right? What is flower? See, in our surroundings, majority of the plants are angiospermic plants. In our surroundings, when we'll observe our surroundings, majority of the plants are angiospermic plants or flowering plants. So major reproductive organ in angiospermic plants are flowers. Flowers are considered as major reproductive organs. Reproductive organs. Okay, right. This flower is a modified shoot. Flower is considered as modified shoot. It is a modified shoot. So what is the meaning of this word modified shoot? So it means branch or shoot only modified into flower. Branch or shoot modified into flower. But how so? See, at the tip of the branch, it has meristematic tissue, apical meristematic tissue. See, that apical meristematic tissue gradually modified into floral meristematic tissue, right? So apical meristematic tissue gradually converted into floral meristematic tissue. So that floral meristematic tissue releases one type of hormone, that is florism hormone. So that florism hormone responsible for the production of flowers, responsible for the production of flowers. See, whenever apical meristematic tissue converted into floral meristematic tissue, so that floral meristematic tissue releases hormones, no, florism hormone. So that florism hormone reduces that internodal elongation, right? So internodes are completely reduced. It means that nodes and internodes are highly condensed at one point, that is thalamus. Thalamus, right? So first, what is flowering plant? How that flower originates on the shoot, we will see, right? So tip of the shoot gradually turns into stalk of the flower. So what is the stalk of the flower? Pedicel. Am I right? Pedicel. Stalk of the flower called pedicel. See, the tip of the pedicel or stalk of the pedicel, sorry, tip of the pedicel becomes swollen. That swollen part is called thalamus. See here, it is thalamus. Otherwise, we call it as receptacle, thalamus, or we call it as receptacle, right? So the tip of the pedicel becomes swollen. That swollen part is called thalamus or receptacle. So on the thalamus or receptacle, many nodes and internodes are highly condensed. What is node? Wherever leaf arises on the stem, that particular site is called node. Internode means the distance which is present in between two successive nodes called internode. So that nodes and internodes condensed on the thalamus, right? Arranged on the thalamus, right? So that condensed nodes produces leaves. Leaves. But in general, here that leaves are modified. So modified leaves. So that modified leaves are considered as floral leaves. Is it clear? See, whenever, so that branch or shoot modified into pedicel, so that nodes and internodes are also highly condensed on the thalamus. So that condensed nodes produces leaves, but instead of normal leaves, they produces floral leaves. Flower leaves are modified leaves. So that modified leaves arranged in 4 whorls. See here, that modified leaves arranged in 4 whorls or 4 rounds, right? So what are they? So come to one by one here. So the outermost whorl is calyx. Am I right? See, outermost whorl is calyx. Calyx. Then second whorl, corolla. Third whorl, Androecium. Fourth whorl is gynoecium. So better to take outermost whorl in flower, that is calyx. So what is calyx? It is the outermost layer, and that too it appears green in color, right? So that calyx made up of a small subunits called sepals. So that calyx composed of a small subunits called sepals. So that sepals are flattened green color structures. Green color structures. Then, see, if that sepals are arranged freely, we call it as polycephalous condition. Am I right? Polycephalous condition. So when we consider it as polycephalous condition, when the sepals are arranged freely, we call it as polycephalous condition, right? So in some flowers, that sepals are united with each other, joined with each other. So we call it as gamocephalous condition. Gamocephalous condition. Am I right? So calyx is the outermost whorl or layer of the flower. It is made up of a small subunits called sepals. That sepals are flattened green color structures. So if that sepals are arranged freely, we call it as polycephalous condition. If that sepals are united, gamocephalous condition. Right. So in general, that calyx provides protection to the flower during bud condition. That calyx provides protection. That calyx provides protection. When it provides protection during bud condition. So during bud condition, so that remaining layers, corolla, Androecium, gynoecium, that male and female reproductive organs and corolla totally covered by the one of the green color structure, that is calyx. So what is the function, main function? Calyx provides protection to the flower during bud condition. And one more thing, it provides food materials. So it synthesizes food materials by the photosynthesis process. So because it is green in color, no. So it synthesizes food materials by the photosynthesis process and supplies that food materials to the male and female reproductive organs. Right? So there are two important functions. One is it provides protection to the flower during bud condition, that outermost whorl calyx. Then second one is it synthesizes food materials and supplies food materials to the developing organs like male and female reproductive structures. Right. Then, so in general, after fertilization, that calyx fall off. Right. So that calyx fall off after fertilization. So after fertilization, it is fall off. Am I right? But in some plants, in some flowers, that calyx remain persistent after fertilization also. Best example, chili. Right? Except chili. What it is? Chili, capsicum frutescens. In chili, that calyx remain persistent. Then what about second one? Brinjal. Solanum melangina. Brinjal. So in chili and brinjal, that calyx remain persistent after fertilization also. But in majority of the plants after fertilization, that calyx fall off. Right. Then come to second whorl again in flower. Second whorl is Corolla. Second whorl is Corolla. That Corolla is colored and attractive. Correct? That Corolla is the second whorl. So it is colored and attractive and attracts insects for cross-pollination. But it is composed of or made up of a small subunits called petals. Right? What are they? We'll see. Come to first whorl calyx. Second whorl again. So what it is second whorl? Corolla. So that corolla composed of a small subunits called petals. Petals. So that petals are colored and attractive. Colored and attractive. So what is the use of petals? That petals attracts insects for cross-pollination. Cross-pollination. And if that petals are arranged freely, we call them as polypetalous condition. Polypetalous condition. So when they are arranged freely, right? So when that petals are arranged freely, we call it as polypetalous condition. So these petals, if that petals are united, gamopetalous condition. Gamopetalous condition. If that petals are united, all right. Okay now. So what is the main function? They attracts insects for cross-pollination. They attracts insects for cross-pollination. What it is? Cross-pollination. That attracts insects for cross-pollination. Then, see, both calyx and corolla are considered as non-essential organs. Why? Because they do not meant for reproduction. It means they do not participate in reproduction. So both calyx and corolla. So both calyx and corolla are considered as non-essential organs. So why we call them as non-essential organs? They do not meant for reproduction. It means they do not participate in reproduction. And what about tepal and perianth? Perianth. In some plants, both calyx and corolla are considered as perianth. Right? So both calyx and corolla considered as perianth in some plants or in some plant flowers. So why so? Why? Because we can't differentiate what is calyx, what is corolla. Right? Both of them appears same in color. Same in color. We can't differentiate what is calyx, what is corolla. So we termed it as perianthma. Both calyx and corolla, right, constitutes as perianth. Perianth, right? So that perianth made up of a small subunits called tepals. Mean tepals. That perianth made up of a small subunits called tepals. So in which family members we found tepals? In Liliaceae family members. So best example for this is Liliaceae. Liliaceae family members. Liliaceae family members we observe perianthma. Perianth made up of a small subunits called tepals. Right? Both calyx and corolla constitute as perianth composed of tepals. Example, Liliaceae family members. So Liliaceae family members are monocots or dicots? Monocots. So monocot plants these are. So what is the main characteristic feature of trimerous, tetramerous, pentamerous flowers? See, presence of tetramerous and pentamerous flowers is the main characteristic feature of dicot plants. So presence of trimerous flowers is the main characteristic feature of monocot plants. It means if that calyx consists of just three sepals and three petals. So we termed it as monocotyledonous plant. If that calyx and corolla consists of either 4 or 5 sepals, either 4 or 5 petals, so we called it as a dicot plant, right? So based on the sepal number, based on the petals number, easily we'll identify that flower is either monocot or dicot flower, right? So trimerous flower is the main characteristic feature of monocot plant. Tetramerous and pentamerous flowers are the major characteristic features of dicot plants, right? So both of them are called essential organs or non-essential organs. Calyx and corolla are considered as non-essential organs. Why? Because they do not meant for reproduction. So now come to third whorl again. So what it is third whorl? Androecium. Third whorl is Androecium. See like this. Third whorl is Androecium. So that Androecium composed of a small subunits called stamens. So now come to third whorl, that is Androecium. Androecium. Pronunciation is Androecium, right? So the third whorl is Androecium. So that Androecium composed of a small subunits called stamens. Stamens, right? Androecium composed of a small subunits called stamen. Third whorl it is. Third whorl in flower. On the thalamus, there are 4 whorls: calyx, corolla, androecium, gynoecium. Third whorl is androecium, composed of stamens. So each stamen represents male reproductive organ. Male reproductive organ. So it is also called as microsporophyll. Microsporophyll. So why we call it as microsporophyll? Phyll means leaf. Microspore is nothing but pollen grain. So it is the structure responsible for producing pollen grains, right? And that too, it is a leaf modification. Leaf modification. Normal leaf modified into stamen here. All right. That's the reason we call it as microsporophyll. Phyll means leaf. Microspore means pollen grain. So pollen grain producing leaf-like structure it is. Hence, it is called microsporophyll. It represents male reproductive organ. And that too, each stamen includes 2 parts. One is filament. One is filament. Second one is anther. Filament and second one is anther. So it is responsible for the production of pollen grains. See here, this is the stamen. So this one is filament. The second one is anther. The fertile one is anther. So long elongated tubular structure called filament and fertile part or tip of the filament called anther. So that anther is responsible for the production of pollen grains. But in some plants, that stamens are considered as sterile stamens. So that sterile stamens are called staminode. So what is staminode here? So sterile stamens are called staminode. In some plants, that stamens cannot produce pollen grains. All right, that stamens are called sterile stamens. Another term for sterile stamens, staminode. Best example, cassia auriculata, complete scientific name, but better to write it as cassia. So in cassia flowers, they found staminode type of stamens. Staminode means sterile stamens, right? So this is the third whorl in the flower, that is Androecium. So this anther is responsible for the production of pollen grains. So now on to fourth whorl. Fourth whorl, that is gynoecium again. So that fourth whorl is gynoecium. So fourth whorl or innermost whorl is called gynoecium. See here. So this is gynoecium. So that gynoecium composed of a small subunit called what it is? Pistil or carpel. Pistil or carpel. That gynoecium composed of a small subunit called carpel or pistil. So it represents female reproductive organ or male reproductive organ? Female reproductive organ. It represents female reproductive organ and it is also called as megasporophyll. Megasporophyll. Why we call it as megasporophyll? So megaspore producing leaf-like structure it is, right? So that's the reason we call it as megasporophyll. Right. And so each carpel includes three parts. Each carpel includes three parts. What are they? Basal swollen part is called ovary. A long elongated tubular structure called style and tip of the style called stigma. Am I right? See, better to take carpel. This is single carpel now. So the basal swollen part is ovary, long elongated tubular structure called style, tip of the style, stigma. So this is ovary. Am I right? So basal swollen part is called ovary, long elongated tubular structure, style, and tip of the style. So this is stigma. Right. Stigma is also considered as platform of the pollen grains. No, it captures pollen grains from the surroundings. Right. Then cushion-like structure which is present inside the ovary called what it is? Placenta. Right. Placenta. So on the placenta, one to several ovules originates. Syllabus. One to several ovules originates on the placenta inside the ovary. We call it as placentation. Placentation, right? So both androecium and gynoecium are considered as essential organs. So both androecium and another one gynoecium. So both androecium and gynoecium are considered as essential organs. What are they? Essential organs. So why we call them as essential organs? Why? Because they're meant for reproduction, right? So both of them, androecium and gynoecium, participates in a reproduction, hence they are called essential organs. So this is the information about longitudinal section LS of angiospermic flower. So this is the information about longitudinal section of flowering plants, otherwise angiospermic plant. So this is important for PU also, right? 2 marks question. So draw the diagram of angiospermic flower, LS of flower, right? So remaining information, each and every word important for objective, right? So what is calyx, what is corolla, what is androecium, what is gynoecium, what is perianth, and in which plants we observe perianth, right? So each and every word important. So note it down. So now come to sexual reproduction. Now come to sexual reproduction. What is sexual reproduction? So, see, when offspring produced by the two parents with involvement of male and female gametes. When offspring produced by the two parents with involvement of male and female gametes called sexual reproduction. And that to the offsprings which are formed in sexual reproduction not exactly identical to their parents and among themselves also, right? So because two different organisms genetic material is involved in sexual reproduction, so automatically some variations or changes occurs in next generation in sexual reproduction, right? And that too, it is elaborate process, complex process, so many steps are involved in sexual reproduction. So for our convenience, all the events which occurs in sexual reproduction classified into three major events. One is pre-fertilization event, second one fertilization events, and third one post-fertilization events. So first come to pre-fertilization structures and events. Pre-fertilization. So pre-fertilization structures. Structures and events. So what type of events comes under pre-fertilization events? Is gametogenesis and gamete transfer. So before gametogenesis and gamete transfer, what type of structures also participates in pre-fertilization events? We'll see, right? So best example for this is stamen. Right? Just now we discussed what is stamen. It comes under third oral, Androecium. Androecium composed of a small subunits called stamens. So each stamen represents male reproductive structure. So each stamen represents male reproductive structure. And each stamen includes two parts. So what are the first one is filament. Second one is anther. Right. So the proximal portion of the filament, proximal portion of filament attaches to thalamus. Either thalamus or petals. Epipetalous condition. In epipetalous condition, so that a stamen's filament attaches to the either thalamus. In epipetalous condition, that filament attaches to the petals. But in normal conditions, so that filament attaches to the thalamus. Just you have to write like this. So the proximal portion of the filament attaches to the thalamus or petals. Right? So it represents male reproductive organ or female reproductive organ. Male reproductive organ. So it is also known as microsporophyll venereal. Microsporophyll. Right. And what is the difference between dithecous anther and monothecous anthers? So first, better to take dithecous anther or dithecous stamen. See here. So it is anther stamen. So it is filament, and this is anther. But in majority of the angiospermic plants, that anther clearly differentiated into two lobes. So this is one lobe and it is another lobe, right? So one lobe it is, lobe. So these are lobes, two lobes. It is one longitudinal lobe, it is another lobe. So we call it as bilobed anther. Am I right? So it is considered as bilobed structure or bilobed anther. And each lobe consists of two theca. Two theca are spherical shaped structures. So that's the reason we call it as dithecous, dithecous anther. So bilobed anther or dithecous anther. Then matured anther consists of 4 microsporangia or 4 pollen chambers, 4 pollen chambers or pollen sacs. So hence it is called tetrasporangiate anther. Tetrasporangiate anther. Is it clear? So this anther is considered as bilobed anther, dithecous anther, then tetrasporangiate anther. So why we call it as bilobed anther? So it has 2 lobes, 2 longitudinal lobes actually, right? Then second one, why we call it as a dithecous anther? Each lobe consists of 2 theca. What is the meaning of theca here? Spherical shaped structures, right? 2 theca. Hence it is called dithecous anther. Then tetrasporangiate. What is the meaning of tetrasporangiate here? Each lobe consists of 2 microsporangia or pollen chambers. Total anther consists of 4 microsporangia or pollen chambers or pollen sacs. Hence it is called tetrasporangiate anther. Example, majority of the angiospermic plants exhibits bilobed dithecous tetrasporangiate anthers. Bilobed dithecous tetrasporangiate anthers. Then monothecous anthers again. Monothecous anthers. See here. So this is monothecous anther. So what is the difference between these two anthers? So here it is bilobed anther. It is unilobed anther. Write down unilobed anther. Then, and what about this monothecous? Why we call it as monothecous? Only one theca is present here. So monothecous anthers. Then, and each theca, otherwise each lobe consists of 2 microsporangia or 2 pollen chambers or 2 pollen sacs. Hence it is called bisporangiate anther. Bisporangiate anthers. Right? So it is unilobed, monothecous, then bisporangiate anther. Right? Then where exactly we observed this type of anthers? So unilobed anther, single lobe, monothecous, 1 theca, then 2 sporangia. Why? Because each lobe consists of 2 microsporangia. No, here also 2 microsporangia. Hence it is bisporangiate anther. So best example for this is Malvaceae family members. Malvaceae. Spelling is Malvaceae. Malvaceae family members. So except Malvaceae family members, remaining all family members exhibits bilobed dithecous tetrasporangiate anthers only. Right. So according to Benthamudaka's system of classification, total families, 202 families. In that 202 families, except one family, that is Malvaceae family, remaining all family members exhibits bilobed dithecous tetrasporangiate anthers. Right. So Malvaceae family member example, hibiscus rosa sinensis. Within the brackets, you have to write hibiscus, China rose. In hibiscus rosa sinensis, what type of anthers we observe? Unilobed anther, monothecous anthers, bisporangiate anthers. Right. So this is the structure of stamen. So sterile stamens and fertile stamens. What is the difference between sterile stamen and fertile stamen? So sterile stamens are considered as staminodes. It means they cannot produce pollen grains. So fertile stamens produces pollen grains. This is the actual structure of stamen. Now we are going to discuss TS of anther, transverse section of anther. So when we'll take transverse section or horizontal section of the anther, so how it appears. what is the actual structure, transfer section of anther, we will see. Important TS of anther, transfer section TS of anther. So fertile part of the stamen called anther. So when we'll take transfer section, how it appears? Imagine it is stamen. So this is anther. Right? So that anther structure. See like this. Right? So when we'll take transfer section, it appears like this. All right? See here, it is one lobe completely. This is another lobe. So this is a connective tissue. So two lobes attaches with each other by the connective tissue. This is connective tissue, right? See that anther enclosure barrier by the anther wall. Anther wall. Right. Then these are microsporangia, singular microsporangium. So microsporangia or singular microsporangium actually, right? And the cells which are present in between two pollen sacs called stomium. Stomium, right? So when we'll take transfer section of the dithecous anther, so the dithecous anther appears like this, right? So it is clearly differentiated into two lobes. It is one lobe and it is another lobe. And each lobe consists of how many theca? Two theca. So this is one theca, this is another theca, right? So dithecous, right? So bilobed, dithecous, tetrasporangiate anther. Tetrasporangiate anther it is. Okay, right? See, the TS of anther clearly differentiated into two main parts. One is anther wall and second one is microsporangium. Right? Anther wall and microsporangium. Otherwise, better to take sporogenous tissue. So, what type of tissue located inside the microsporangium? Sporogenous tissue. Sporogenous tissue. So that sporogenous tissue enclosed by the or surrounded by the anther wall. Right? So TS of anther includes two important parts. One is anther wall, second one is sporogenous tissue. Right? Two parts. So one is anther wall. Second one is sporogenous tissue. Sporogenous tissue. So where exactly it is located, sporogenous tissue? In microsporangium. So both anther wall and sporogenous tissue is considered as one microsporangium here. That microsporangium enclosed by the anther wall. Okay, right? That anther wall again differentiated into four layers. Four layers. What are they? Epidermis. Second one is endothecium. Endothecium. Third one, middle layers. Middle layers. Then fourth one is tapetum. Tapetum. Right. See, the TS of young anther exhibits two parts. One is anther wall. This is anther wall. Second one is sporogenous tissue. Right. So that sporogenous tissue and anther wall constitute as one microsporangium actually. Right. Then, so better to take anther wall first. So that anther wall again differentiated into four layers. So four layers present in anther wall. In that, first one is epidermis, second one endothelium, third one middle layers, then fourth one tapetum. Tapetum. Then better to take this portion, enlarged portion. So up to here, better to take up to here, enlarged portion. So what is epidermis here? Epidermis is the outermost layer. See here, imagine it is epidermis. So epidermis is the outermost layer of the anther wall. It is single cell thick layer, uniseriate layer or single cell thick layer composed of parenchymatous cells. That cells are arranged compactly without intercellular spaces. See here, this anther wall differentiated into these four layers. First one is epidermis. Epi means outer. Epi means outer. Derma means skin or outer layer simply. See, outer layer of the anther wall is epidermis. It is single celled thick layer. Single cell thick layer. Then each and every cell consists of dense cytoplasm and prominent nucleus. Dense cytoplasm and prominent nucleus and enclosed by the thick cell wall. Enclosed by the thick cell wall. But the epidermal cells which are located in between two pollen sacs. See exactly here. That epidermal cells which are present in between two pollen sacs enclosed by the very thin cell walls. Very thin cell walls. So called stomium. The two cells are called stomium. What is the use of that stomium, sir? So after maturation, so that stomium responsible for dehiscence of anther. Dehiscence of anther. It means releasing of pollen grains. So that after maturation, that anther ruptures at stomium. That anther opens at stomium. Right. So right, just 3 points here. It is the outermost layer and single celled thick layer. So the cells enclosed by the very thick cell walls, but the cells which are located in between two pollen sacs are very thin. They are responsible for dehiscence of anther after maturation. After maturation. So what is the function, overall function of epidermis? It provides protection. It provides protection to the internal tissues or anther simply. It provides protection to the internal tissues or anther. Then come to second one again. What it is? Endothelium. Endothelium. See, radially elongated cells which are present below the epidermis called endothelium. Radially elongated cells which are present below the epidermis called endothelium. Endothelium. See, endothelium present below the epidermis and that too composed of radially elongated cells. See here. These are radially elongated cells. So where exactly they are located? So they are located below the epidermis. Epidermis. So how will define that endothelium? So radially elongated cells which are present below the epidermis called endothelium. Endothelium. So radially elongated cells which are present below the epidermis called endothelium. That too, that radially elongated cells are arranged in one layer. One layer. So each and every endothelium cell consists of cellulose thickenings or fibrous thickenings now. Right. So that endothelium cells consist of fibrous thickenings or cellulose thickenings now. So what is the use that cellulose thickenings or fibrous thickenings are? Hygroscopic in nature. Hygroscopic in nature means they absorbs moisture from the surrounding cells. They absorbs water or moisture from the surrounding cells and keeps that endothelium cells in turgid condition. Turgid condition. Is it clear? So radially elongated cells which are present below the epidermis called endothelium. Each and every endothelium cell consists of cellulose thickenings or fibrous thickenings. They are hygroscopic in nature. Hygroscopic in nature means they absorbs moisture or water from the surrounding cells and keeps that cells in turgid condition. Turgid condition means fully water containing cell is called turgid cell. Turgid cell. So whenever it absorbs moisture from the surroundings, right? They maintains turgidity. Right? So they keeps that cells in turgid condition. But after maturation, what will happen? So, see, after maturation, so that endothelium cells undergoes contraction. Right? Whenever they loses water, so they undergoes contraction. That cells undergoes contraction and they are responsible for dehiscence of anther. It means responsible for releasing of pollen grains. So this is a second layer, that is endothelium. So first layer epidermis, second endothelium, third one middle layers and tapetum. So epidermis, endothelium, we completed 2 layers. But remaining 2 layers, middle layers and tapetum information we'll see in next class mark, right? See anther, tiers of anther, in that anther wall. In anther wall again, 4 layers, epidermis, endothelium, middle layers, tapetum. Here it is epidermis, second one is endothelium. So remaining 2 more parts are there now. So middle layers and tapetum, that information we'll see in next class, right?